OK, to boxing now, where chaotic scenes unfolded in Manchester last night when Chris Eubank Jr. slapped Conor Benn with an egg during a heated face-off ahead of their upcoming bout. Well, a planned head-to-head at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium today has been cancelled amid security concerns. Let's get more on this. I'm now joined by Sky Sports expert, former Cruiserweight World Champion Johnny Nelson. Johnny, really good to see you. And I mean, just when you think you've seen it all, a real shock moment in a head-to-head. What did you make of it all?
You know what? It sets up so many one-liners. I can think of other ways to make an omelette. But I think Eubank Jr. Kind of read the script before. He said, 11 years I've been a professional. Every time I boxed in the UK, I've been booed coming in. I've been classed as the villain. So he's basically saying, oh, I'll play the villain. But there's two villains up here. To do that, to me, it tells me that Chris knows no matter what, they want this fight. This fight has to happen because realistically, he could risk being suspended by the board, getting a massive, hefty fine by the board. The show could be in risk of being cancelled. All these things, he knows the power to be. They know that they want the fight desperately. So he's going to do whatever he wants to try and get under the skin of Conor. And Conor was pretty cool up to that point, but actually Chris assaulted him. That's what they can say. Would Conor go to press charges? Would Eddie? You don't know, but Chris is playing the villain. And if he's going to play a villain, he's playing a very good villain right there, because that's all everybody's talking about. It's like, why? What were you thinking? I'm actually surprised by Chris, if I'm honest with you. I'm actually surprised because I thought it was a bit classier than that. So there must be something else happening behind the scenes, you know, that we don't know about, that really, really rattled him for him to think of and plan doing something like that.
Yeah, because we see things happen in these kind of boxing events where things do spill over, emotions perhaps get to the better of one boxer or the other. The fact that it was premeditated, does that add another factor to it all?
Well, Eddie Hearn afterwards said the gloves are off. And I'm not surprised today's the press conference tomorrow might be cancelled, because you can't test human emotion. You don't know what Nigel Benn's going to do. You don't know what Conor Benn's going to do. He was ballistic. No, they took about 5 or 6 20-stone men to hold this young man down. Do you think that is going to somehow keep him away from him? I remember David Haye, Derek Chisora, Mike Tyson, Lennox Lewis, when they had to, or was it Ivanov, when they had to get the glass cage between them. Now it's got to the point where this is what it is. So they've got to be careful. Having these two in the room, they don't have to do any more promotion. They don't have to sit down head to head. They don't have to be face to face again. And I think the only time they'll risk doing that is fight week, because any other time it's far too risky. It could explode in human emotion again. I understand. I get what Chris has done to try and get under the skin of Conor, but it was wrong. Yeah, it was wrong. He put his hands on him, and so it was wrong. But you know what? He's saying, I'm going to play the villain. You know, I've been a pro, I've done everything right up to this point, and I'm booed constantly. This guy, you know, he's had adverse findings in his system, and I'm still the villain. So he's playing his role.
Yeah, and you touched on it already, but there has been so much build-up to this. I mean, 2.5 years of build-up. Is it a case of that build-up just simply spilling over?
Yes, because, again, I remember the first time when this should have gone on and things were said and Chris wasn't playing game. No, that's not the case. No, you're saying and doing things that aren't true. And he was so mad at Conor because he thinks Conor's got away with it, scot-free. So he's saying, all right, if he's going to do this and get away with it scot-free, I'll fight fire with fire. I'm not justifying what Chris has done, because it's wrong is wrong. You know, putting a hand on a man like that, wrong is wrong. But what I can understand his motive. I can understand he's thinking, I am going to play this villain. So when we get in there, there's no pantomime. This is real deal. Many times you see fighters, you know, they'll be shouting and screaming at each other before the fight. Then after the fight, they'll give each other a hug. There's real hatred and dislike between these two. I don't know where the Boxing Board of Control will stand on this. I don't know if they'll jump in and if they'll fine him, if they'll suspend him. I don't know but they'll have to do something if this is under their jurisdiction.
Yeah, and I mean, Eubank Jr. had some strong words for Eddie Hearn last night. Before we come to you, Johnny, let's just remind everyone of what he had to say at the news conference.
This is not the Eddie Hearn show.
One thing's for sure, it ain't the Chris Eubank show.
This is not the Eddie Hearn show.
No.
This is Eubank versus Benn. So you can either sabotage this.
You got your man to your right is going to say a few words.
You can either sabotage the event, and I'll just start talking to Ben personally, directly, or you can be quiet and we can move on with the press conference. I don't want to hear anything you have to say.
I mean, you can do whatever you want.
We can be here all day.
I've been addressed.
We can be here all day.
I've been addressed.
I don't want to hear what you have to say. So,
well, to be honest with you, many people do. I think I'm more popular than you.
Ade, if you want to control the situation and move forward, you can.
I'm enjoying this. This is almost like a mini face-off.
So how would you run the press conference, Chris? Because you're such an unbelievable promoter.
I'm not running it, but I'm just not listening.
So what happens now?
We move on.
Well, you talk?
I'd love to talk.
Johnny, what did you make of that? Have you seen Eddie like that before?
No, this is rare things. It's not very often a fighter. Realistically, the fighter employs a promoter, he employs a manager. Nowadays, you've got the manager and promoter telling the fighter what to do, even though he's doing all the work. Chris has gone in and said, "This is about me. It's not about you, Eddie." You know, the other fighters have done it. Ray Leonard's done it. Muhammad Ali's done it. Jack Johnson did it. To the point where this is about me. Mike Tyson did it. So they supersede the promoter. Basically saying, get in your place, that is your job. It's just a shock to us because we're so used to it being the other way around. Whereas in reality, you know, if you can talk, if you have something to say, if you're confident to hold your own, then the promoter, you know, he's got to sit down and do his job. Eddie's a great promoter and he's going to stick up for his boy because he's going to try and do everything possible to sell this fight. This fight is now sold. They don't need another press conference. I'm quite sure tickets, as soon as they go on sale on Friday, will go in a heartbeat. I understand what Chris was doing. He was taking control of his career, taking control of this fight. That's about him and Conor Benn. And as far as he's concerned, he's showing pure disdain to Eddie. And he's saying, well, I don't need you. You don't need to be involved in this.
And of course, most boxing fans, most sports fans know that this rivalry started between their dads. Johnny, if you can, just give us a deeper sense of how intense that rivalry was. Yeah,
because I'm old enough to remember that one. That rivalry was something we'd not seen in this country for a lifetime, because Chris and Nigel Benn were so opposites. Now you could see Chris got under the skin of Nigel by just breathing, by just being in the same room. Remember, they signed the contract live on TV, and the whole nation got behind them because it was like watching an argument in the street and just looking at it like that through your eyes, thinking, I don't want to look at this, but I've got to look at it. And you could see the emotion of these two fighters that hated each other. And Nigel's gone on to say that afterwards. I know he's apologised to Chris yesterday, what he said about his dad, but Nigel said, I hated him. Chris said, I felt nothing for him. I knew what this sort of man was. Like father, like son, on both sides. And even though Chris Sr. wasn't there, Chris Jr. held his own. Chris Jr. did exactly what he had to do. And Conor, you know, good on him, was very respectful, very humble, very, you know, stood in his own until the point where the egg smashed in his head. All we can do is speculate. I've tried to get hold of somebody inside Chris's camp to see if it was, you know, what was he thinking, what was going through his brain. You knew exactly what Conor thought, but Chris, I'll say it again, I am surprised. But then listen to what he said. He's playing the villain because he's being treated like that one every time he's boxed here in the UK.
And Johnny, I promise I wasn't calling you old then, but back in 2012 as well, let's just take our viewers back to them, because there was that press conference between David Haye and Derek Chisora. We're seeing the pictures now with that big fence in the middle. It's not necessarily what we want to see going forward, is it? But do you think this is a place that we might get to when it comes to these head-to-heads, these press conferences?
It will be for this one. For Conor and Chris, this will have to be the case, because they cannot trust there won't be a repeat of it. It will be for this one. And I can totally understand it being that case. But, you know, it created more intrigue, more drama, more speculation. But do not be surprised. The next time these two are together, there's either a glass screen down there or there's a fence down there. I totally get it. Because when the promoters and security and everybody's around there and they don't know what their fight is going to do next, what else can they do? They've got to do everything possible to make sure it doesn't happen again. So don't be surprised by this being the case. So you will see that again.
And I mean, you've got lots of experience as the man who sat between angry fighters when we do the gloves are off. We've seen fiery exchanges between the likes of Froch, Groves, White, Chisora, springs to mind. It's going to be pretty difficult to keep these guys cool in the build-up. As fans of boxing, though, do you think, does it take anything away from the spectacle, from the event, when things like that have to be put into place?
God, I'd love to do a gloves are off with those two. Wow. And you can always tell if somebody's hustling, if it's real. For those two from my seat right now, that's for real. This morning I went in the sauna, we sat in the sauna, that's all everybody was talking about. So the fans are not losing. The fans are like, oh my goodness, that was all the conversation was, in the sauna. That's all what people talk about. That's just that little part. The whole country will be talking about this, even if you're not into boxing. Because you'll be shocked and you're thinking, is that real? Is that pantomime? Is it for real? It's created conversation. It's evoked emotion. The job's being done. So is it unfair on the fans? No, not at all, because it's going to get A, arguing with B. Your Eubank fans and the Benn fans are going to be arguing with each other saying, was he right? Was he wrong? Oh my goodness, this fight, I want a ticket. Tickets will go through the roof. But I do know this is built up so far to something so exciting. And that's not the end of it. That is not the, if people think that's it, it's all done and dusted, you're having a laugh. This is going to get worse.
Yeah, I mean, when it is done and dusted in terms of the fight itself, who's going to win?
Wow, I actually, at one point, I said Conor Benn was probably one of the most improving fighters I'd ever seen, until obviously his career came to a full stop. And so through inconsistency of his career, I'm leaning towards Chris. I'm leaning towards Chris because Conor's been inconsistent. Chris is naturally the bigger fighter. He can fight. He's been in higher caliber of opponents. He's been busier than Conor. So you've got to lean with common sense, regardless of what you think. If Conor had his career hadn't stumbled and he'd not had the ban and all this sort of stuff had happened, I'd have gone towards Conor. But I just don't think he's been active enough as an active professional fighter to win this fight.
Johnny, always great to get your insight. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.